Mr. Kim, members of the Council, guests and friends, it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening. We're all going to be, I think, extraordinarily interested in our distinguished guest who has had, to say the least, a most interesting career. His life as a citizen of Korea has been one of dedication to the political system in that country. He participated in it as an elected official in his legislature. He ran for the presidency of his country and received 46% of the vote in the early 1970s. In that country's attempt to deal with its perceptions of its political problems, something less than a democratic system has often been utilized. Mr. Kim has been imprisoned in Korea for the role that he's played in Korean politics. He at one time was sentenced to death. He has had his sentence, well, it actually wasn't commuted. He was allowed to leave the country after serving 2 years in order to come to the United States for medical treatment. He's taken advantage of that year. He's been at Harvard University, an invitation which he was first tendered in 1972. During the time in the United States, a number of Americans have focused very earnestly on the problems of South Korea and its struggle with its attempts to establish a more democratic system. Mr. Kim is recognized as perhaps the leading dissident leader in that particular country. He now wishes to return to Korea and plans to do so shortly. Many of you I know have read recently of that intention. Representative Mikulski of our state has been one of the primary initiators of a letter signed by almost 100 members of the Congress asking the President of Korea to look favorably upon Mr. Kim's return to that country. Mr. Kim, of course, addressed an open letter to his President and the Secretary of State of this country indicating his intention to return and the reasons for so doing. There are several views which one can take about the struggle of a country such as Korea with its political problems. We know Korea, of course, as a good friend of the United States. We know it as a country which has achieved enormous economic progress in recent years. We also read about it because of its struggles to establish a more democratic system. And recently in the press we've all noted with some interest some steps taken by the President government at least to indicate an interest in a further democratization of that country. It's not our role, of course, as Americans to make decisions about those kind of things, but we remain deeply interested in the future of a country which has been a great ally of the United States. And so we are interested, deeply so, in hearing the wisdom from one who stands outside of the present mainstream of official Korean politics. Mr. Kim, as I've mentioned, has had an interesting career. He's widely respected in his country. He will be returning shortly. We welcome his views on the internal and external relations of that state. Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Bott, for your kind introduction. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind providing me such good opportunity to speak to you. Topic of my speech is the Korean situation, the United States role, and my return. First, allow me to thank you for this opportunity to speak before the Baltimore Council for Foreign Affairs. The efforts made by members of this council, those who have made arrangements for this evening, and by the people of Baltimore in general, clearly reflect concern for present development in Korea. As you may know, I am planning to go back to my own country in a few months. Before I explain why I am returning to Korea, where a 17.5-year prison term awaits me, I want to tell you something about the present situation in Korea and the role of the United States there. The present political situation in South Korea is serious. I would underline the seriousness of the situation, and I'll give you a brief description of some of the present abuses of human rights in South Korea. Since May of 1980, when General Chun Doo-hwan took power in bloody coup, our people's aspirations for democracy, which were raised after the assassination of dictatorial ruler Park Chung-hee in 1979, have been dashed. Under the harsh rule of military government, the judicial branch, the National Assembly, and the opposition party have all become rubber stamp backers of the regime. The media have become impotent and serve only as tools of the dictatorship. Elections for the presidency and National Assembly are mere window dressing. More than 500 politicians were banned from engaging in political activities during and following the 1981 elections. The list was then pared down to 99. More recently, the ban was lifted on 84 of these 99. Yet, 15 persons are still banned. These 15 includes Kim Young-sam, the former opposition party president, Kim Jong-pil, former prime minister, and myself. The banning of such prominent and moderate figures can be likened to the banning from politics of Senator Gary Hart, Senator Kennedy, Jesse Jackson in this country. Free trade unions and farmers' cooperatives are not allowed. Any labor who participates in a free trade union movement is immediately fired from work and put on a blacklist. This list is circulated among all companies so that the worker cannot find new employment elsewhere. Academic freedom is not allowed, and conscription is used by the government as a punishment for students who advocate greater academic freedom and democracy. Since last spring, the Korean government has released hundreds of political prisoners and reinstated students and professors who had previously been expelled from campuses for their criticism of the dictatorship. It is rather a cosmetic gesture without systematic change toward democracy. The government can re-arrest and re-expel these persons any time it chooses to do so. In fact, many times since the Park Chung-hee era, we have seen the arrest, release, re-arrest, and expulsion, reinstatement, re-expulsion cycles for numerous government critics. Torture and arbitrary arrest are common things in South Korea. Amnesty International and the annual human rights report of the United States State Department have both mentioned these occurrences. Many people outside Korea believe the South Korean government has succeeded in its economic policy. It is true, our people have contributed to the realization of a brilliant economic growth, but there are many precarious problems in the South Korean economy due mainly to mistaken policies and corruption carried out by a continuous military government. According to Korean newspaper reports, 59% of Korean laborers suffer from below subsistence level wages of $100 a month or less. $100 a month is half the amount needed to meet their living costs. 92% of Korean farmers are burdened with heavy debts. In 1983, these farm debts increased by 56% over the previous year. On the other hand, a mere 10 business tycoons dominate 53% of the GNP. Government corruption is rampant. Recently, the number 2 man in the ruling party was charged with embezzling $20 million worth of property. He was told to step down from his position. This is but a single case. There are numerous instances of corruption involving ranking leaders of the ruling party and the government. The more economic growth there is in South Korea, the greater the people's dissatisfaction will be. The greater the increase in the people's dissatisfaction, the greater the need is for suppression from those in the privileged class. This class needs military dictatorship to suppress advocates of fair distribution, free trade unions, free farmers' cooperatives, and other democratic rights. Such advocates are labeled pro-communist or harmful elements. They are accused of eroding national security. So, South Korean laborers and farmers, the common people, have been forced to keep silent. I really must underscore the fact that the most dangerous phenomenon in South Korea is not the unjust economic and social situation, but the fact that those who are dissatisfied do not have a proper way to resolve their problems peacefully and legally, because the Korean media, the courts, the opposition parties, and the National Assembly are only rubber stamps for the administration in power. The people do not have a way to make their voices heard peacefully. Many see violence as the only alternative. There is and will be a dangerous worsening situation. It will eventually become explosive. Radicalism will gain a foothold, and communism may even become accepted. Anti-American will prevail. We have already seen many signs of such imminent future trends. Korean military dictators have always justified their suppressive rule with 3 arguments. The United States government and to an even greater extent, the Japanese government have supported these theories. First, they say there is an imminent security threat from the North. This threat makes it necessary, they say, to accept repressive rule in the interest of realizing a secure defense posture. However, I say that this is a very mistaken idea, both theoretically and historically. To realize a strong security system against communists, we need something to secure. What we need are democratic freedoms. From history, we note that 30 years ago, during the Korean War, when North Korea communist troops invaded South Korea along with 1 million Chinese troops, we repelled them northward in close cooperation with United Nations forces, mostly from the United States. We were able to do this while enjoying democratic freedoms. We then had freedom of speech, direct election of the president, local autonomy, and independent judicial and legislative bodies. Because of these freedoms, our people had good reason to fight communist dictatorship. In spite of this, demonstration of security carried out by the people who enjoyed these democratic freedoms. The present regime is forcing us to accept dictatorship in the name of security. It is depriving us of all those freedoms we had 30 years ago. So there may be objections to Israel's foreign policy in practice. No one can deny the fact that Israel, with a population of only 4 million, has secured its borders against the surrounding population numbering some 150 million hostile Arabs, because democracy exists in that nation. Democracy in Israel has allowed it to be successful in the confrontation with the surrounding non-democratic nations. Democracy and security have been inseparable. Second, many people here and in Korea say, along with economic growth will come growth in democratic freedoms. But our experience has taught us that this is not true. During the Korean War, when we enjoyed democratic freedoms, our people's per capita income was only $60. Now it has soared to $2,000. But we do not enjoy the same freedoms we had when it was only $60. I do believe without democracy, there can be no fair distribution of economic growth. Without fair distribution, though there may be economic growth, we can hardly expect the growth of democratic freedoms. Democracy is the only way, only true guarantor of human rights. Third, some Americans say even though military dictatorship is severe compared to the communist dictatorship in North Korea, it is far milder. To avoid harsher dictatorship, we should tolerate this milder dictatorship. In a sense, this is very persuasive. However, experience since World War II has shown that milder dictatorships in mainland China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Cuba have been defeated by harsher communist dictatorships. The reason is very clear. The Communist Party has been able to satisfy communist followers by practicing communism, but milder dictators have not been able to satisfy any elements in the population, and these milder dictators then have not had any strong supporters to protect them. Their defeat has been quite natural. The most bitter experience of this was in Vietnam. In spite of continuous suppressive rule and the use of intelligence organizations to subvert democratic groups by means of infiltration and intimidation, the democratic movement has grown rapidly. Thousands of students have continuously demonstrated for the abolition of the dictatorship and for a guarantee of the free trade movement, academic freedom, and the lifting of the ban on prominent politicians. Hundreds of laborers and democratic dissidents are supporting the movement. Laborers are struggling under especially harsh conditions of exploitation and arbitrary firings. Students and laborers have been occupied the opposition party headquarters and forced these politicians to fight for democracy, a task which the politicians had long avoided. On November 14th, students attacked and occupied the party headquarters of the ruling party. The students' reason for this action was to give vent to their shock and anger at reports that police forcefully stripped women students in front of others. Rumors also spread that police had been involved in raping these women students. We face an explosive situation in Korea. There are other problems which cannot be disregarded because the Korean government and newspapers do not report the full story on events in South Korea. A fairly large number of our people are listening to North Korean broadcasts that give news of the South by adopting reports from the newspapers and wire services of the United States, Japan, and other countries. South Koreans turn to these broadcasts because they are so thirsty for knowledge about what is going on in South Korea. Of course, North Korean broadcasts do not report things simply and accurately. They also add comments and propaganda. You can easily imagine how dangerous this is. Since 1961, a handful of power-grabbing soldiers have been involved in politics. They have totally dominated not only politics, but also military affairs. Any military leader who doesn't support the military regime cannot maintain his position, even though he may be faithful and able in attending to his defense duties. This has greatly damaged military morale and order. Military involvement in politics has also resulted in deterioration in our people's support for and love of the national army. There is serious criticism of U.S. policy, a policy of support for military dictatorship. Everyone in Korea believes U.S. support of the military dictatorship is a major obstacle for our people in their efforts to restore democracy. The United States has decisive influence in Korean national affairs. The U.S. has stationed 40,000 U.S. troops in South Korea with nuclear weapons. The U.S. Army commander has a right to control the entire South Korean military of 600,000. Everybody knows that without U.S. support, the Korean government could not have matched the huge sum of $50 billion in foreign debt that it now has. 32% of Korean exports are dependent on U.S. cooperation. 25% of imports come from the United States. Moreover, United States support of dictatorship has caused Japanese support to follow more readily. Without U.S. and Japanese support, Chun Doo-han could never have succeeded in getting power in face of the extreme lack of support from our people. This has been noted in major U.S. newspaper reports. Since Chun Doo-han has come to power, anti-American sentiment and activities have grown. U.S. cultural centers have been set fire, and U.S. flags have been burned. So I don't condone such destructive measures, and I do not believe all these acts represent anti-American or pro-communist sentiment. They do speak of an anger toward American policy. Now, especially among angry young men, laborers, and intellectuals, the question is more and more frequently asked: will the United States choose firmly to support democracy and not to support dictatorship? I do believe the United States is facing the crossroads in meeting another situation like that in the Philippines. It may well lead to another Vietnamese-like situation in which domestic turmoil and guerrilla warfare are in effect encouraged in South Korea. A U.S. congressional leader who is well informed of the Korean situation already expressed his concern on this topic in an article that appeared in the New York Times in the fall of last year. It was Congressman Soros from New York State. We moderate Democrats worked for three major goals. They are broad unity among democratic opponents, nonviolent struggle, and moderation. Moderate Democrats are also facing a crossroad, whether we can succeed in persuading angry people not to be radical and impatient, but to be moderate and persistent in pursuing our goal, is a serious question. At the same time, we must encourage the reluctant majority to participate in the efforts and struggle. Can we succeed in persuading the United States to change its Korea policy? Will the United States give strong moral support to our people's aspirations and struggle for democracy and human rights? It is at this point in time, as we face these questions, that I am going back to Korea. I have been in the United States for fully 2 years. For the first time in 12 years, I have enjoyed safety and freedom. For 10 years before coming here, I was imprisoned for 5.5 years, under house arrest and surveillance for 3.5 years, and in exile for 1 year. I was sentenced to death in 1980 when General Jung staged a military coup on charges the United States State Department called far-fetched. My charge was sedition. I have escaped death 5 times in my life, once at the hands of communist forces and 4 times at the hands of dictators. In view of the freedom and safety I have enjoyed in this country, many ask why I should return to face prison, house arrest, or even greater danger. The reason for my return are very, very clear and urgent. One is to participate in the ordeals and struggles of our people. Another is to encourage the majority of the people who really don't like to present dictatorship, but are reluctant to take part in efforts for the restoration of democracy. They face a dilemma. They fear for their own personal safety, but they know that dictatorship must be ended. Still, many doubt that democracy can be restored. I believe we can succeed. A third reason for my return is to comfort radicals, to persuade them to be moderate and patient, and to discuss the issue with them. At present, I am somewhat confident of being able to achieve these goals. But if the present situation continues for several years, things will worsen beyond my ability to play an effective role. If circumstances were to become that severe, I would have to abandon my life's purpose of realizing democracy in South Korea and the reunification of our people. If I were to remain here in safety, my life would become meaningless. I really cannot endure seeing such a negative development. Before it is too late, I must go back in spite of the danger. You may ask how I may maintain discussion with radicals or pursue other goals if I am put in prison or placed under house arrest. The fact is that my return itself will be a most persuasive and emotional message to our people. They already know that I have long urged them, both in Korea and here, to seek the goals of a broad unity, nonviolence, and moderation. Nobody can make an absolutely perfect choice, but we can make a best or necessary choice. I think this is a necessary choice for me to live with my conscience and with our people, and to live with the common goals of the people of the world. I am not merely pursuing a struggle against military government. Dialogue with the regime is also important. It will be a first step after my return to Korea. I very much want to resolve the present political deadlock with peaceful and orderly means. This can best be done through dialogue with the Jung government to avoid social instability. At this critical moment, what I am asking of you American friends is not that you restore democracy in our state. Democracy should not be handed over by others, but gained by our people's commitment, effort, and sacrifices. We are asking your government not to support military dictatorship. We are asking you American people to give our people, the Koreans, moral support. Koreans share your belief in freedom, justice, and human dignity under a democratic system. If you can impress your government to let our people know that it is a real supporter of democracy in Korea, then they, including democratic elements in the military, will be greatly encouraged to restore democracy for themselves. We are eager to restore and promote friendly ties with the United States and Japan. If these nations support our goals for democracy and human rights, we worry about U.S. foreign policy in the third world, where it has supported dictatorship and disregarded the aspirations of the people. U.S. foreign policy has mainly resulted in forcing third world people to become anti-American and pro-communist, and has thus ultimately helped the expansion of communism. We don't want to see the United States fail anymore, nor do we want South Korea to become another Vietnam due to the U.S. government's mistaken policy. Please impress your government, congressmen, and the public to support our people's cause, whether I am free under house arrest or imprisoned. I will always remember you, American friends. Let me believe when I am in Korea that your continuous support and efforts for our people and myself will be forthcoming. And let us succeed in establishing a proud democratic Korea with strong friendship between the people of the Republic of Korea and the people of the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kim, we certainly thank you for that very clear presentation of your position. Mr. Kim has agreed to answer questions. This is an interesting first question. Mr. Kim has heard this kind of question before, I think. If in the unfortunate circumstance that you suffered the fate of Mr. Aquino, how would that affect affairs in your country?
Many people say there are much similarities between the fate of Aquino and myself. I really think so. And I met him at Harvard University, and he was a very great man, and I respect him. So I am very happy that I have some similarity with him. But I really don't want to be similar to his last fate. I am not sure what kind of attitude South Korean government will take when I go back. At present, after my sending message noticing of my plan to go back, Korean government has responded very negatively. If I come back, they will put me in the prison again. But they have not said they will commit the same crime when I come back. This is my impression that American government, this attitude is very firm that America government really doesn't want to see same situation of Aquino case when I go back to my country. I think American government really don't want to see same thing. So I also believe Korean government must learn much lesson from Aquino case, and if they commit same thing, Korean government cannot maintain. It will be destroyed by our people's uprising and world criticism. So I think they will not be so stupid to commit same crime when I go back. But I don't know how much I would be free, or whether how much I would be free or I would be put in the prison again. But at present, there is strong possibility of re-imprisonment of me.
Do you expect to ask the President of the United States for a meeting before you return to Korea?
Yes, I do. I came here in December of 1982. Immediately after, I expressed my deep gratitude to President Reagan because he made a decisive role to save my life. As you know, where I was sentenced to death in 1980, and President Carter, who strongly supported me, was defeated. So military government leaders of Korea were very much encouraged when President Reagan, Mr. Reagan was elected. So there's much danger I would be killed. This is former American ambassador to Korea, Mr. Greitin's remark. So he was very much frightened at that Korean military leader's attitude. So he flew back to Washington, D.C. and met President-elect Reagan. And Mr. Reagan told him, even though there's a change of American administration, but there will be no change of American policy to save Kim Dae-jung's life. So I know that's President-elect Reagan's firm attitude made a decisive role to save my life. So I expressed my deep gratitude to him about this thing, and also his effort to release me from the prison. And I asked him to meet with me, but I have failed. But before departure to my country, I want to have a chance to meet with him, because I really worry about American President Korea policy. As I mentioned in the speech, we are not asking American government to intervene in our domestic problem or to restore democracy on behalf of us. We only ask America to impress our people. America is a supporter of democracy and human rights, not a supporter of dictator. If President Reagan's remark when he visited Seoul in November of last year was true, then America must impress our people. At present, most of our people believe America is a supporter of dictator. America is, if there's, America doesn't support dictatorship, we can easily restore democracy, because South Korean government, President Jung regime, is not supported by our people at all. This thing, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, all American major newspaper reported that present regime is not supported by Korean people. There was a public poll this year done by a major Korean newspaper. The result was this. Fully 80% of our people responded saying we should restore democracy, even at the expense of slowing down of economic growth. This is our people's aspiration. So only when there's democracy, we can expect real stability and security, which can force North Korea to abandon its long-lasting ambition to communist South Korea. After that, we may have constructive, sincere dialogue with North Korea to produce permanent peace on Korean Peninsula. And next step will be a prudent, careful reunification step. If there is such permanent peace on Korean Peninsula, this may greatly reduce American defense burden in this region. So the democracy in Korea, very beneficial, not only for our people, but also for American national interest. So I really want to discuss with President Reagan about this thing. If America disregard such possibility, if America disregard our people's present aspiration for democracy, within several years, we must meet another Philippine situation, such as New People's Army, Communist Army, urban guerrilla, or extreme anti-American and destructive movement. We can't avoid this. So we Democrat moderate, we are last card to prevent that. But if, as long as America continues present such, Korea policy, we lose our base. So we will be useless within several years. So President Reagan opposed communism. I also oppose communism. So if he really supports democracy, of course I support democracy. There's no reason we can't reach agreement. So I am really want to meet with him once. So I will ask him to meet with me.
If you are not put in jail, will you be participating in the parliamentary elections which are due next year?
No. I will not, and I am not able, both. Because even if there's a parliament election in coming February, but that's a kind of window dressing election. There is no freedom of speech. No newspaper can report anything what government doesn't want to be reported. And there's no local autonomy. So from Prime Minister till village clerk, all government officials, including police, President can control them at his own will. So whenever there is an election, all the government officials become a campaigner for a ruling party. And there's no real opposition party. There's no freedom of campaign. Every candidate are allowed only to participate 2 or 3 times joint public speech. There is no private, campaign. Even party president cannot make a speech for his party's candidate. No, freedom of, election. So even if we participate in the election, we can't expect any good result. The situation in the Philippines is far better. There is an opposition newspaper, There's a real opposition party. There's local autonomy. There's some, considerable guarantee of free election. Situation is quite different from that in Korea. And at the same time, even if I would not be put in the prison again, but I also cannot participate in the election. To participate in the election, 3 measures are necessary. First, my remaining sentence, 17.5 years, must be amnestized. I must get the amnesty to cancel that prison term. Second, my civil rights must be restored. Third, as I mentioned in this speech, with special law, I am being banned from participating in politics. So it is impossible for me to participate in coming election.
Would you tell us the charges which you faced and whether you thought you had a fair trial?
My charges?
The charges, you referred to them earlier as sedition. If there's anything to be added to the charge of sedition, would you tell us what that is? Would you in short amplify on the charges, perhaps, and tell us whether you thought you had a fair trial?
In 1980, when I was sentenced to death, my charge was sedition. There was 2 major charges, though many other charges there. One is when Park Chung-hee, former Korean president, proclaimed Yushin dictatorship in October of 1972. So then I was in Japan. So I, imposed me self-exile in Japan, and I stayed in Japan and America from October of 1972 till August of 1973, when I was abducted by Korean CIA in Tokyo hotel. So I stayed in America and Japan for 10 months. Then I organized anti-government movement in Japan and Korea. The Korean government took that organization, was anti-state organization. So by Korean law, the head of anti-state organization, must meet death sentence. That was one charge. Second, I was arrested May 17th of 1980 by Chun Doo-han. Next morning, May 18, when citizens in Gwangju city, my home province, capital city, heard of my arrest, they uprose against Chun Doo-han, and they asked my release and abolition of martial law, stepping down of Chun Doo-han. So there was Chun Doo-han massacred hundreds of Gwangju people who only advocated these things, Western-style democracy. And he fabricated my charge that I was instigator of that, uprising. But when Gwangju people uprose, I was already in the basement of Korean CIA. So there was a contradictory. Without Korean CIA's cooperation, I couldn't instigate them. But that was a charge. So I was sentenced to death with these 2 things. State Department of American government sent its lawyer to observe trial at court-martial. After careful examination of that process, American State Department, officially disclosed my charge was far-fetched.
You referred during your address to a poll in which the Korean people said that they would prefer increased democracy even if it meant some slowing of economic growth. Where was that poll, how was that poll taken, and where was it reported?
Well, that poll was taken by a leading Korean newspaper. And though Korean newspaper is under strict government control, that result was reported on Korean newspaper. So we have copy. But though I introduced our people's response that even though at the expense of slowing down of economic growth, we should restore democracy. But I don't think if we realize democracy, there will be a slowing down of economic growth. I don't think so. Japan and West Germany adopted democracy after World War II. But we know how much they have succeeded to realize brilliant economic growth. So this clearly demonstrates under economic situation, we can expect very strong economic growth. And I can say, democracy is very necessary to realize a healthy economic system. We can expect economic growth under dictatorial government, such as under Meiji government of Japan, and under Hitler, or in communist countries. But we can never expect wealth distribution in dictatorial government, including communist zone. So without wealth distribution, healthy distribution, we cannot expect real social stability. In America, for example, GM has 500,000 stock owners. But in Korea, there's the same size of business tycoon. That company is owned only by one family. And and at the same time, there's such mistake in America. South Korean, there's a free market system. No, that's not true. There is only government-controlled economy, no free market system. So whenever government want, they can destroy business tycoon within a year. And if any penniless man can get government favor, he would become business tycoon within a few years. We have a lot of evidence. If anyone, Korean government side, say Kim Dae-jung said right, I can raise a lot of evidence. So there's no real free market system, and there's no freedom of trade union. There's no free movement of consumers. Recently Korean color television set was decided. Korean company made dumping in this country. When they sell color television in the United States. After that, in Korea, Korean color television makers reduced price by 30% to 50% in Korea. That means before then, even though they made a dumping in United States, our people, consumers, were forced to buy color television set with such high price, because our consumers don't have any freedom to criticize such government or businessmen's wrong attitude, and there's no choice for them but to buy Korean-made color television set, because there is no freedom of import of that thing. So there's no free market system in Korea. So we are advocating free market system.
Would you comment on the present government of Korea's position and the position of the United States on reunification of North and South Korea?
As you know, there are ongoing dialogues between South and North about economic issue or Red Cross issue and other things. I really welcome this dialogue between South and North, because it will reduce tension on Korean Peninsula. But that will produce a very limited effective, because without strong government in the South, we can't force North Korea to abandon its ambition to communist South Korea. So to realize permanent peace and fruitful result of the unification process, we need a strong government in the South. Strong government means supported by our people, which is enjoying full support of our people. Such government must be called really strong government. That is democratic government. When there is democratic government, there will be stability and security. And North Korea must give up their ambition to communist South Korea. Then there will be a sincere dialogue to produce peace on Korean Peninsula. Then we can ask North Korea to have a dialogue to produce a very careful and prudent economic process. So as first step, there must be two independent government. In the North, communist government; in the South, democratic government, under loose type of federal organization or federal assembly. But this federal organization will be, at first step, a kind of symbolic organization. But along with the agreement between both governments, both governments can transfer their power to federal government. And finally, this federal government become a kind of American-style federal government. This is our idea. But to achieve this goal, as precondition, absolutely necessary precondition, democratic government must be there in South Korea. And we must be cross-cooperative with America and Japan, because Korean Peninsula is surrounded by four powers: Soviet Union, China, and America and Japan. So North Korea has cross relation with Soviet Union and China as alliance, and we have same relations with Japan and America. So we need cross cooperation and discussion with these two friendly countries to promote reunification process. But at the same time, we must have a sincere dialogue with North Korean communist regime as same people to terminate present unfortunate hostile division. So these two things should be carefully done simultaneously, I think.
Mr. Kim, we thank you very much for an excellent question and answer period. Thanks for sharing your time with us.